Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another week of our math that you want to be doing class. Pete, do you remember where you were on September 11th, 2001?
September 11th, 9/11.
Yep.
9/11, 2001. Nobody will forget that day.
That's right.
Yeah. The irony is that I was actually presenting my master's degree research. I was defending my thesis.
What was your topic?
Curves in architecture.
Oh, it sounds stimulating.
It was amazing. Yeah. It took me a year. I wrote a 130-page paper. And Curves in Architecture, I started out by studying these two books. One was called Why Buildings Stand Up, and the other one was called Why Buildings Fall Down. Nowhere in that did it say they fall down because planes fly into them.
Wow.
That's the crazy thing, is I was literally on the Portland State University campus presenting a lecture on why buildings fall down while buildings in New York were falling down. Is that mind-blowing?
That's amazing. But it makes me think, now I'm intrigued. I have an engineering background. I'm a structural engineer. Why do buildings stand up? How would you answer that? And why do they fall down?
It was interesting. I thought that would be the primary emphasis of my research, which would be the structure. You know, I'm thinking about as a mathematician, as a physicist, the primary considerations in design would be making something strong. And of course, that is important. But as I looked into it, there were lots of other reasons. There was ease of construction. Like, you can design something really strong, but if you can't build it, if there are no methods by which you can put these things together, materials, concrete, steel, wood. So there were all sorts of new dynamics that I had to consider and write about and study. And one of the cool things was there's a famous architect named Vitruvius, a Roman architect, that said good architecture must have three qualities. It must have firmness, which is the strength, that's the physics. It must have commodity, in other words, fit to the function. It must do what it's supposed to do. And then he said it must have delight. It must have aesthetic appeal. And I was thinking, how do we produce delight? What is delight?
In a building.
Yeah, how do you
in a structure.
produce delight? What would you say?
Well, I have a feeling that the answer has something to do with mathematics. And I think that's why we're talking about it.
Yeah, I ran into all of these historical reasons for building art into the construction for the sake of the art. For example, the Pantheon in Rome was built with a certain geometry to model the cosmos as it was understood back then, and to also impress upon those viewers the greatness of the Roman Empire, having nothing to do with the integrity of the structure, but rather the meaning of the structure. Another example is Alberti, a famous designer, designed this church in St. Sebastiano in Mantua so that it would have harmonic proportions built into the design. So music was going to be played there and sung there, and he actually built the building in such a way that the ratios and proportions that make beauty in a musical chord were built into the structure. It wasn't that the structure was singing, but the structure was representing music. And so there were just a whole lot more reasons to design things than just the practical way of doing things, which I thought was pretty amazing.
When I think of math in architecture, I just think of the structure. I think of the calculations the engineer uses to make it stand up. But you're talking about something, you're talking about math for an aesthetic appeal or for a delight.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah, and so it's all important, and we'll talk about that. This will just be a little survey, just a lecture to appreciate all of the math that goes into design, whether it's a human design or even, as we've kind of talked about, design in nature, like the structure of a flower is absolutely amazing. When I was studying math and architecture, I was looking at structures like flowers because, there aren't like braces. In a building, there are braces. There's the internal structure that makes it strong.
Yeah.
But if you think of a flower petal, God has designed these shapes that support themselves without the internal components. And so the design actually doesn't simply support the shape, but we actually find it alluring and enticing and beautiful. So,
And those curves are actually mathematical. There's
curves-
equations
Yeah.
that define those curves
Yeah.
that we find appealing and beautiful.
yeah.
And this week in class, we're going to take a look at what is the math that's behind the beauty in art or in architecture.
It's going to be amazing.
See you there.